Welcome to Leadership by the Glass, Episode 1. This is the podcast where we explore leadership through the lens of wine, because leadership, like wine, is shaped by context, character, and the conditions around us. I'm Dr. Elizabeth Connolly, and each week we uncork a leadership idea, pair it with a wine, and talk about what it actually looks like to lead well and drink well in real life. So pour yourself something you enjoy, settle in, and let's get started. This episode is coming out during Super Bowl week, and I want to start there. This is not a sports podcast. I understand that. But sports, and especially championships, have this tendency to reveal really big things and really elevated emotions that we might otherwise miss. And football and wine actually have some overlap and commonalities, and we'll get into that. And leadership and football have overlap and commonalities, and we'll get into that. So this episode is really on leadership, on football, on wine, and how they all come together with the New England Patriots. I am from New England, and so I apologize to those of you, probably most of you, who are not Patriots fans, but I have been watching this Patriots run really closely. Like I always do, though, I can't quite turn off my leadership lens. And I have found myself paying less attention to the score. Okay, well, that's not true. I've been paying a lot of attention to the score, but I've been paying less attention to what's happening on the field and really focusing on what's happening on the sidelines and how leadership shows up when the pressure is very real and very public. I am talking, of course, about the New England Patriots head coach, Mike Vrabel. Mike Vrabel was one of my favorite players when he was on the Patriots, and seeing him back at Gillette has been so amazing and so interesting. Not just because of the former player's story, he's a former player leading his team to the Super Bowl, but really I've been watching him through a leadership lens and how he's setting the tone for his team. A lot of the announcers have been describing him as a player's coach. And the more I have watched, not necessarily the on-the-field piece, but the more I've watched him in spaces where he's interacting with his team, the more that makes sense. One of the big things I noticed was after the game, when his players are coming out of the tunnel, he stands there and he high-fives and he hugs and he acknowledges every single player. Giving that individual recognition, that is visible engagement. And I also notice the way he's present on the sidelines. You see the joy in his face when his team is making a play. He literally, in some cases, runs alongside the field as his player is running for a touchdown. He's running up the field. And some of that is just, old energy and from his days as a player, and he still enjoys the game. But there's a leadership piece to that. So as I'm listening closely, or I'm watching closely all of these different elements, there's a third piece that kind of comes in that really helped me shape this week's episode. I was listening to his players, and I'll get into what they said a little bit later, but I was listening to his players in their post-game interviews, and particularly Drake May, his quarterback. Some of the language that he used to describe him really struck me in terms of leadership. He said phrases like, he challenges us. He always has something to say to us, but he cares. He cares about each one of us. He's a constant. And many, many times he kept saying he cares, he cares, he cares. So what I heard was, here's somebody who was pushing them, challenging them to be their best, but they knew he made it visible. He made a point that they all thought he cared about them individually. And he was a constant. He was showing up authentically time and time again. It really stuck with me. And when I think about New England leadership style, we are so used to, or we were so used to Bill Belichick. And Bill Belichick and his austere style, we revered this. This tough as nails, this very few words, very few emotions, show up, the phrase when I was really, when the Patriots were sort of at the height of their dynasty, do your job, right? That was their phrase. And there's nothing wrong with that. I'm not bashing Bill Belichick at all. I mean, we loved it here. We respected it. I did wonder when Vrabel took over, was there going to be room for both? Or were people going to accept this new style? And yet here we are with Vrabel, and he's totally different than Bill. And that's not taking anything away from Bill. Different leaders have different styles. But I think it's really important to remember that the players are different. These are young guys. This is a different generation. Mike Vrabel is who we were thinking of before, but Mike Vrabel isn't coaching Mike Vrabel. Mike Vrabel's coaching Drake May, and he's coaching all these young guys. I think he mentioned at one point that Drake May is his son's age. So Vrabel knows that you have to take a different approach with this group. And so when I look at Vrabel just quickly, I notice heightened expression of emotion. I notice he shows joy in his face. He shows nervousness. He's happy. He's exuberant. And he's also quieter, not quiet in the Bill way, in the reserved, like, I'm not going to tell you what I'm thinking way, but quieter in just, he's a leader that's going to show up. And I see him adjust his style and how he talks to people really based on who's the player in front of him at the moment. I might see him like hold onto a face mask and really talk to a player, but then I also see him hug a player and you can see him encouraging somebody. So I'm really seeing him show up differently based on who he's dealing with in the moment. And I'm also seeing that leader as he's running up the sideline. I'm seeing a leader who's there alongside him. Many of his players in their post-game conferences talked about, oh, coach has been here before. He knows. That's establishing credibility, and there's something to be said there too. So those two ideas, a leader that adjusts based on who's in front of them, and a leader that has rolled up their sleeves and is right alongside the players for the ride, that's what I want to explore today. And I will be exploring it through the lens of Cabernet, and that will also tie back into the Patriots, so stick around. So the first leadership idea that I really want to get into is something called situational leadership. It sounds kind of obvious. At its core, situational leadership is the idea that there is no single best way to lead. And you could apply this to coaching too, right? There's not one way to coach. Bill Belichick has one way. Mike Vrabel had another way. Every coach in the NFL has their own way, just like every leader has their own style. But there are accepted leadership theories, and situational leadership really says there isn't one particular leadership theory or method that's better than the others. Instead, effective leaders show up and adjust how they lead, not who they are, that's really important, but how they lead based on the competence, the confidence, and the readiness of the people that they're leading in any given moment. The model was developed by Paul Hersey and Ken Blanchard, and I think one of the really big key takeaways from their work is that leadership effectiveness depends on fit, not rigidity, and changing the leadership style, but not the person leading. I'll explain. It's the leader that does the adjusting, not the person that they are leading. There's a common misconception about situational leadership is that this means you can just be an inconsistent leader, that you could just sort of show up and do whatever you feel like. That's not what it is. You don't change your mind every day. You don't move goalposts, to use another football metaphor. It's really about having awareness, really knowing your people, really paying attention to the context, to the timing, and responding thoughtfully and reflectively rather than reflexively. And again, you can see this clearly in sports. The New England Patriots have a second-year quarterback, a sophomore quarterback. They don't need the same leadership approach as Tom Brady needed after all of the seasons that he played. You have to respond based on the person. A player in a high-pressure moment doesn't need the same feedback that they might during practice. The leadership shifts, but guess what doesn't shift? The value doesn't shift. And I go back to Drake May's comment that Mike Vrabel is constant. He's always got something to say, right? He's always got feedback. That feedback is going to be different if you're in the Super Bowl or in a high stress playoff game versus a practice. But when he says he's constant, he means he's still Mike Vrabel. He still is himself. They trust him, and he's still that authentic, trustworthy figure. So he doesn't change, but the way he leads does change. Situational leadership isn't about picking the leadership style that you like on any given day. It's about showing up as the leader that your followers need that day. And it changes moment to moment and context to context, day to day, team to team, game to game, right? It's about what does the person in front of you need based on all the information that you've taken in, and how can you meet them where they are that particular day. It's not just football though, right? Leadership shifts, but the values don't. And this happens in any organization. We see it in schools, corporations. Two people with the same title might lead very differently depending on where they are developmentally, emotionally, professionally. But situational leadership reminds us that it's not the it's not the leadership style that you want. It's not, I want to be a servant leader or I'm a transformational leader. You don't walk in and decide what kind of leader you are. You are the leader that your people need. And I think that is so important. And it's hard work, right? It's a lot of hard work. But that's what I see in Mike Vrabel. I see him showing up for each player that as they need it. I show him treating this organization and these players differently because of maybe what they had gone through in the past. For their age, right? A lot of reporters have asked him about phones and things like that. And he responds because he understands that he's coaching people in their young 20s and late 20s. Like, he's coaching a different group of people than he was when he played. So he's not the kind of leader he wishes he had, per se. He's the leader that these guys need in this moment. The second leadership idea that I want to explore, and then we'll kind of put them all together, is servant leadership. I want to layer this in because servant leadership is where that trust piece comes into the picture. Yes, his players have said he's a constant. He's always got some feedback for us. Like, he makes us each individually think that he cares about us. That's that situational leadership. But when he's running down that field next to his player, when his players say things like, "Coach has been here before, he knows, like, we trust him, he knows," that's servant leadership. Servant leaders, they roll up their sleeves. They're out there. Servant leadership was introduced by Robert Greenleaf, and the really kind of core but simple idea of it is that leadership begins with service. And we don't lead through authority or position under servant leadership. We focus on growth. We look at well-being. We lead from a position of appreciation, of success. But the big, big, big thing is that you lead alongside. Servant leaders are visible. They're present. They're not sitting up in an office dictating memos. They're out on the floor with their people. They're not up in the box calling down plays. They're running up the field. They're not just saying what to do at practice. They're breaking up things, and they're running the ball, and they're demonstrating, right? And research on servant leadership consistently links it to higher levels of trust, stronger relationships, and increased engagement, especially people in high stress environments. This is so, I can't think of a better context for this than football, right? Or than Mike Vrabel. When they say he knows because he's been there, that's what they're talking about. They believe he's one of them. And he reflects that back. You constantly hear Vrabel say things like, "I'm so proud of these guys." I've been watching the media day stuff for the Super Bowl this week. And when they're asking, what are you most proud of with this team? Or what's, where should the credit go? He's always giving it back to the players. He's always saying the credit goes to them. "I'm so proud of them. The best Super Bowl is going to be this one when we win it," right? Like, he's always putting it back on his players because he's leading alongside them. It's a group. They're in it together. And this matters because if we go back to situational leadership, if he was just adapting to each player, but there was no trust built from servant leadership, it might feel manipulative. It might feel like he's purposely trying to psychologically figure out each player and sort of do something, right? But with the trust, that adaptation to each player doesn't feel manipulative at all. It feels like true support. It feels like real support. And so these things actually work really well together. The whole situational leadership piece explains how leaders can adjust their approach, but the servant leadership sort of explains why people are willing to accept that adjustment, to accept that change. And when people believe that a leader genuinely cares about them, it lands differently. The feedback feels purposeful. It doesn't feel punitive. It doesn't feel critical. And the pressure that a coach or a leader might put on someone, it feels like they're investing in them. When Vrabel is holding them to a high standard, they're not feeling like he's coming down on them. They're feeling like he is pushing them because he knows they can succeed and he believes in them. And that combination, that's become so visible as the Patriots have kept their playoff run going. It's so, so important. So where does wine fit into all of this? Okay. I want to talk a little bit about Cabernet. And normally I would actually bring the wine in a little bit earlier, but because this is a specific wine for the Patriots and for New England, I wanted to kind of give it its own space and not just talk about it in context with the metaphor. So today's pairing, this is a 2022 Bledsoe Family Cab. And I chose this for a couple of reasons. For those of you that may not know, Drew Bledsoe, owner of Bledsoe Family Cab, he was the quarterback in New England way back before Tom Brady. So Tom Brady got his start because Drew Bledsoe got injured and Brady got to come in. Bledsoe was on that initial team, that initial run to the Super Bowl. He was a leader on the field. So, I mean, I want to give Bledsoe his due. We talk a lot about Brady around here, but he was a big part of that initial championship. He was a leader on the field. He was a teammate, But I'm not surprised that after football, he went into wine. So it makes total sense, right? He's built something entirely different, but it's still rooted in things like patience, craft, long-term vision, all those things that a quarterback, that a leader would have to have. Cabernet as a wine itself is usually associated with power, structure, like opulence, right? Like Cabernets, at least, the Robert Parker Cabernet, like these are like the big, bold wines. But the best Cabernets aren't really about might and force, at least in my opinion. That's totally my opinion. You might disagree, but I love Cabernets that are balanced. I think that's when they're magical. It's actually one of my favorite grapes, but the balance is so important to me. Just like the balance with situational and servant leadership, right? I think what's especially interesting is how differently Cabernet is grown and expressed depending on where it's planted. That's true of all grapes, but this particular wine, so Drew Bledsoe, for those of you that don't know, after he retired from the Patriots, he went back to his hometown. He went back to Walla Walla, Washington, and he decided to open this winery, and he has the Double V Cabernet, and this is his sort of more approachable, lower tier, mid tier, I guess I would say, brand, Bledsoe Family Winery. And actually, if you have a chance, he did an interview on Wine Access podcast. And something else that really impressed me about him is he's not just a celebrity winemaker that's putting his name on a label. He is actually out there. He knows the geology. He's super into the soil. He is making the decisions. It's truly his winery. And he talks in that podcast, so I'm not going to repeat it. It was a fantastic podcast. Go listen to it. He talks a lot about wine culture with the New England Patriots, and he used to do wine tastings with Teddy Bruschi. And now that he has his winery, a lot of his old Patriots teammates actually buy his wine, and he sends them bottles with their jersey number on them. And he has an interesting story about Tom Brady's jersey number. So go listen to it. It's really great. But I thought it was important to mention that the New England Patriots actually had this whole wine culture while he was there. So anyway, back to Cabernet. So in places like Walla Walla, which is where this wine comes from, conditions can be pretty extreme. Cold winters, hot summers, you've got some diurnal and some big temperature swings. And so the grapes need a lot of attention, a lot of individual attention. They need a lot of thoughtful decision making to reach that balance. A Napa Valley cab grows in a little bit more of a predictable environment. That's not to say, Napa's had its own share over the last few years of, few decades of climate change and things like that. So that's not to say it's completely predictable, but a little bit more predictable. So the leadership challenge there, if we think about a place where it's a little bit more predictable, it's a little bit more one of restraint. When do you stop pushing? And then you've got Bordeaux, right? That's sort of the kind of infamous Cabernet region. There's a lot of tradition there and a lot of long-standing things. And I think about Mike Vrabel coming into an organization with a lot of tradition that had been through a lot of extreme ups and downs, right? What does that mean? Where do you go from there? And so just like wine, there's a lot of decisions that have to be made to get that balance. So this cab, like Cabernet is a grape, depending on where you grow it, it's going to have different conditions, different approaches. Your situation is going to change things. And to me, that's situational leadership in a glass. The winemaker doesn't ask Cabernet to be the same everywhere. We don't want it to be the same everywhere. There's something wonderful to me about tasting a Napa Valley Cabernet, a Bordeaux, a Cab from Walla Walla, and they're not identical. I don't want them to be that. I want all these different expressions of the grape to come because somebody has taken a situationally specific approach to growing those grapes and taken what that grape can offer and made it the best it can be based on the situation that it's in. Leadership kind of works in the same way. So what does this look like in practice? What does this look like for you as a leader? Well, one of the most common leadership mistakes that I see is assuming that fairness means treating everybody exactly the same. Sameness usually ignores what people actually need. And another mistake is using that same leadership style under stress. When pressure rises, leaders either become overly controlling, emotionally distant. But if we're really thinking about situational and servant leadership, this is where we can actually shine. So I'm asking you to think for this week, if we were having a conversation over wine, I would ask you to think about like one person that you lead regularly, just one person. And I would ask yourself to really think about that one person and what do they need more of right now? When a winemaker is looking at an individual vine, they're looking at or excuse me, a grape grower, I should say, is looking at an individual vine. What does that vine need? Does it need more sunlight? Do I need to prune things so that it can access more sun? Does it need different soil? Does it need water? Does it need nutrients? Like, what does it need to be the best version of itself? And you can do the same thing with somebody you lead. So what do they need? Do they need more clarity? Do they need reassurance? Do they need you to light a fire under them? Do they need you to hug them? No, don't hug them. Like, do they need care? Do they need more autonomy? Do they need more responsibility? Just adjust one thing about how you're showing up for them. Not everything. You're still you, right? You've got to have consistency and you've got to constantly be you. You're not changing your values, but what could you change about how you're leading them? People often describe trusted leaders as constants. It doesn't mean that they never change. It just means that their presence and their values are predictable, even when circumstances aren't. Cabernet is different year to year. Every vintage has variance, right? But I still know this is Cabernet underneath it all. I'm not going to drink this and think, oh, this is Pinot Noir. I know it's Cabernet. It's got some hallmarks that do not change. It's got some consistency. But obviously, changes in weather patterns, and if it rained a lot, like, that's going to affect it. Decisions made by the grape growers and the winemakers, like, that's going to change it, but I still know it's Cabernet. And sometimes I want that big, bold Cabernet, and sometimes I don't. Sometimes it's not about intensity. Sometimes I just want some steadiness. So it's important, right? The final kind of connection I'm going to make to Mike Rabel with Cabernet before I move a little bit back into tasting this is joy. The New England Patriots have been through, well, actually, I shouldn't say that. A lot of people are going to turn this podcast off and say, you haven't been through anything. And I guess we've been really lucky around here. But when I'm talking about the players on the team, it seemed like last year was a really rough year for them. And when he came in, what I immediately saw was joy, celebrating the wins. There's joy in it, right? And the same thing, like as our work as leaders, reminding people that their work matters, finding reasons to celebrate little moments of joy. And when I think about wine in general, not specifically Cabernet, but when I think about wine in general, wine to me, first of all, it pairs with joy, right? When I'm excited, when I'm joyful, like, I'm gonna open a glass of wine. Pour a glass of wine. But I also think, to me, this beverage is it's something that you can turn to celebrate those moments, but it's also a celebration itself of all of the things that might have gone wrong. The weather might not have been perfect. You might have had to harvest the grapes at a different time than you normally do. All of those things, all those decisions and all those stressful things come together in this wonderful beverage. And so I think same thing with the team, right? All those things that they went through are coming together with this, like, really important moment. Okay. If you have a glass with you, if you happen to go out and get this particular cap, I invite you to just pause for a moment and notice what's in it. It's really good. So this is the 2022 Bledsoe Family Cab, I should say. Before we talk about kind of what it represents, and we're going to get a little more into it, I really do want to talk about how it shows up in the glass. I get a lot of dark fruit. I get a lot of cherry, black cherry, maybe some plum. As I said before, I am not a wine professional, so this is just my kind of like amateur tasting and what I'm enjoying in it. But under that fruit, under that sort of like delicious dark fruit, I'm getting something really grounded. Cocoa, cedar, some baking spices. It's not overwhelming, but it's definitely adding some depth. Cabernet, and I don't know if you can see it in my glass here, but Cabernet tends to lead with tannin, right? There's a lot of tannins in it, and it gives it a lot of structure. It gives it a nice, clear frame. This Cabernet is not aggressive, and I love it for that. There's this ripe fruit. There's kind of this subtle savory piece. It's balanced, right? It to me, anyway, it's really balanced. There's some kind of freshness that really keeps it energetic. It's not heavy. The finish is really nice. It lingers. And the flavors really, like, you just want to take another sip. It has everything, right? It's a balanced thing. Just like leaders, you need balance. You can't just be jumping from leadership style to leadership style. You can't only just ever be just alongside your people, right? It's important to do that, but at some point you do have to know what your people need because you are the leader. You've got to have both. You've got to have balance. And so what I appreciate in this wine is it's not rushing to make a decision. It's not overpowering me. It's showing up well, sip after sip, just like leaders. We're showing up sip after sip. Leadership needs patience. It needs attention. You need to know the conditions that your team needs to grow. You need to know what they need to grow. You're not forcing a specific style at them, but you're taking what they need and you're creating this beautiful thing with it. I feel like this wine does that. I feel like this wine is not forcing itself to fit a Cabernet. It's lovely. It's balanced. It's got great fruit. It's got all the things I want a Cabernet to have, but it's its own unique thing. And so maybe that's what you need to think about in terms of your leadership this week. You have all the pieces. You can show up with all these different things, but you have to make the decisions of what that means. So as you head into the week, and many of us are going to be watching the big game, I'm going to have this wine while I watch the big game. I want you to think about what I started with. The Super Bowl is this huge, publicly visible thing. The coaches they're in the spotlight, right? They are on the biggest stage. And those big stages, that's not what creates a leadership style. They already have their styles that they choose from. It reveals what kind of leaders they are. So leaders aren't created on the sideline of the big. So here's the question I want you to take with you this week. What's in your glass and how is it shaping the way you lead right now? I know the metaphor was a little clunky. This is my first time doing this. I have a lot of thoughts and I think they are hopefully coming together in a way that makes sense to you, but I would love some feedback about some topics that you're interested in exploring. If there's a particular leadership style that you want to hear more about, if there's a particular wine that you want to hear more about. In future episodes, I plan to be a little more wine forward. I didn't want to kind of come in too heavy with that, too heavy of a pour, if you will, for this first episode. But I'm hoping that with time, I'll kind of hit a good balance for you of what you're looking for, more wine, more leadership, and really get that perfect balance that we just talked about loving. So what's in your glass? If you enjoyed this episode, you can find more reflections like this on the Friday Pour on Substack, and you'll find that linked in the show notes. If you or anybody you know is a leader or just likes to talk about leadership and you'd like to come on the show, I would love to talk to you about what's in your glass, what kind of wine you like, what kind of leadership you engage in, and have that conversation over a glass of wine over this podcast. So if you're interested in that, if you go to leadershipbytheglass.com, there is a form that you can fill out and let me know that you're interested in appearing on the show, and I'd love to have you on here. Thank you for spending this time with me. I really appreciate the opportunity to get into some of these things that I like and explore both of these passions that I have. Again, please let me know what you want to hear more of. Until next week, lead thoughtfully and drink intentionally.